Stanford is the best law school in America, number one in the country, at least according to the ranking that US News put out this spring. But there is also a second ranking with the same schools in the same year, built on the same federal jobs data. On that one, Stanford comes in at number 16. So you've got the same school showing up at both number 1 and number 16 in different rankings, depend on who puts together the data. And so that gap is pretty telling when it comes to law school admissions and why folks think about it the way that they do. Now, here is why those two rankings disagree. One of them is measuring whether a school is impressive. The other is measuring whether the people who graduate from that school actually get hired as lawyers. And those are not the same thing. Now, last year, more than 36,000 people graduated from law school, and more than 1 in 6 of them did not get a real job as a lawyer. I'm talking here about a full-time job, the kind where you've got to pass the bar. That's over 6,200 people spending 3 years of their life taking on 6 figures in debt in many cases with no lawyer job at the end of it. Now imagine a student like Maya who's got good grades, set on being a lawyer since she was a kid. She gets into a school ranked in the top 30 by US News, turns down a less famous one to go there, and she feels like she won. What she never did is check how many of that school's graduates actually became lawyers. 3 years later, and a couple $100,000 later, she's one of those 6,200. Now, she didn't do anything wrong necessarily. She just trusted the impressive number instead of the jobs number. So Maya looked at the wrong number. By the end of this, you're going to know what the right number is, and you'll know how to keep yourself out of those 6,200 who don't get the lawyer jobs. Again, there are two rankings that people are putting out that are prominent. The first is the US News rankings, which runs that whole anxiety machine people are talking about on Reddit. A school climbs a couple of spots. The dean emails the alumni to brag about it. They drop a couple spots. Somebody on the staff is quietly updating their resume. Now, US News has been the kingmaker in legal education for decades. But the second ranking, most applicants have never even looked at. It comes from the Above the Law, a legal industry website. Every June, they put out their own top 50 list, and their rule is pretty blunt and straightforward. They rank law schools basically on one metric: did the graduates get hired to practice law? So the same rankings have nearly the same government data underneath with wildly different answers. Take the University of Arizona, for example. US News ranks it way down at 70th. Glance at that and you'd probably cross it off your list. But on the jobs ranking, Arizona cracked the top 50 this year. And Above the Law said exactly why. Its graduates passed the bar and got hired at a good rate. Pittsburgh did the same thing, showed up out of nowhere. Now, these are schools that nobody's name dropping at Thanksgiving, of course, but quietly, they're getting graduates into real lawyer jobs at a better rate than schools ranked way above them. Now, think about what that means for a real person. They're getting the same degree, putting in the same 3 years, but getting a much better shot at the job they actually went to law school for. And the famous rankings told them to skip that school. Now, flip it around, look at George Washington and Wisconsin. They both sit at number 26 in US News, top 26 in the entire country, supposedly, but neither one makes the jobs top 50 at all. So sit with that for a second. US News says they're the 26th best in America, and the ranking that only cares about whether you get hired won't even list them in the top 50. And there is a reason for that worth understanding. A school like GW sends a pile of its graduates into government, into politics, into federal agencies, into policy work. Those are good careers, they're real careers, but a lot of those jobs don't require you to pass the bar. And so the jobs ranking, which only counts bar-required lawyer work, doesn't count a single one of them. One ranking would give a school credit for those jobs, the other one tosses them aside. And so neither ranking is necessarily flat out lying to you, but they're measuring two different things. The famous rankings, US News, they are leaving out the factor that really matters the most: whether you actually get hired in a job requiring a JD. So let's look at US News. People think that it's all about jobs now, and that's partly true, but a full quarter of the US News score is something else entirely. They're factoring in reputation. They mail out a survey to deans and lawyers and judges, asking them to rate schools on a gut feeling. It's like a popularity contest, and it's kind of circular in nature. And then when US News is counting jobs, they count the non-lawyer jobs also where the degree might have helped, but you're not actually practicing law. Take, for example, a compliance job at a bank or a consulting gig. Is that really what you're going to law school for? Do you need a law degree for that? I mean, they're good jobs, sure, but you're not really practicing as a lawyer, and US News is counting those as wins. Above the law rankings, throw those out. They give 0 to reputation. Almost their entire score just comes down to one thing. Did the graduates get hired to actually practice law at real law firms or in clerkships, the jobs that are going to help you pay off your loans? Jobs where your degree simply helped, that doesn't really count. And they also factor in what US News ignores, which is what the degree actually cost you. And so that's why Stanford falls from first in US News to 16th in above the law rankings. Because in part, a quarter of Stanford's US News crown, their ranking, is reputation. And that's worth nothing when it comes to the jobs list. A chunk of Stanford grads do go on to do things that the jobs formula wouldn't count, like maybe start a company or go into policy or take a fellowship the school pays for. And Stanford is expensive to boot, and above the law factors that in. So them being 16th isn't necessarily a knock on Stanford, but this jobs list that above the law is using doesn't really factor in whether you're going to a job that doesn't require a JD. If it doesn't require a JD, they're not counting it. And this does cut both ways, of course, because for most people going into debt for the degree, the risk is being someone who doesn't have a real job at all that requires a JD, a job that you're not really looking to go to law school for in the first place. And so there are two things that separate those who get the job from those who don't. You want to look at number one, what is the school's real track record? And secondly, how much debt you're carrying when you walk out. And what nobody connects for you is that there is one single thing that moves both of those at the same time, which is your LSAT score. A lot of people will treat the LSAT like a hoop that you've got to jump through, but it's not just a hoop. It's not meaningless. It actually has a real practical value to you. It's the one number in this whole process that is still sitting in your hands today before you apply to law school. Your score decides which law schools say yes to you. If you can get it up a few points more, you're getting into better law schools, not the ones that struggle to place their graduates, but the ones that place almost everybody. You could be the same person with the same college grades, same essays, but a few more points on one single test. Schools that were a reach are now competing for you, giving you more scholarship money. Every law school reports their median LSAT score to the American Bar Association, and they guard that number carefully. They protect it because it helps them in the rankings. If you can beat their median, you make them look better, so they give you scholarship money. Sometimes a full ride. If you come in below that median, then you're paying full price to prop up everybody above you. You could be at the same school in the same year and pay a wildly different price, the only thing changing being your LSAT score. So think about what that really means. The school isn't paying you for being a better lawyer in the future or a better writer or a better person. They don't care about that. They're paying you for a test score that helps them protect their own ranking. And the good news is that's the one thing you can actually sit down and train. And that matters more than it did a year ago because the federal government used to lend you the entire cost of law school, sticker price and all, with no real limit, but that's not the case anymore. They've capped it. You can now borrow a max of $50,000 a year, and that is the ceiling. And unfortunately, plenty of law schools cost more than that. And so if you're paying full price, you're covering that gap yourself with private loans or out of your own pocket, which means scholarship money is not a nice bonus anymore. It's the whole difference, and it runs on your LSAT score. Now, people say six figures like it's nothing, but it's real. If you borrow $200,000 for law school on a normal repayment plan, you're looking at around $2,400 a month for 10 years, every single month, before your rent, before your food. Imagine that writing that check as someone who never got the lawyer job. So here's what you want to do about this. For any school you're serious about, I want you to ignore their ranking. Ignore the US News rank, ignore the above the law rank, even though it's better. Go directly to the school's ABA employment report. It's called the Employment Summary Report. Every law school in the country has to file one. It's free, it's public, and almost nobody ever actually reads it. I've read all of them, and I've published several videos on them on the YouTube channel over the past several months. You're looking for one number here: the share of graduates in full-time bar-required jobs. Not just employed or employed in something. I'm talking about full-time jobs that require a law license. Nationally, that number is better than 8 and 10. And so when you find a school sitting below that, that school is below average at the exact same thing you're going into debt for, and the rankings don't tell you that. If most of a school's graduates are not landing real lawyer jobs, I want you to cross it off. I don't care what US News says. And that gap between where the school sits on the famous US News list and the above the law jobs list, that gap is the prestige gap. If there is a big prestige gap, that means you're paying a premium that doesn't fully turn into a job. And in some cases, the name is still worth it, but there are many cases where it's not. And I want you to know that gap for yourself before you sign on the dotted line. Now, reputation barely moves year to year because it's really a matter of just people's opinions, which are based on previous rankings. And so it's kind of circular, like I said. What does change over time is the employment rates and the bar passage rates. A school where more graduates got hired goes up. That's a good number. If a school where fewer graduates got hired, that means they dropped in the rankings. The jobs ranking tracks the actual market close to live, where the famous rankings US News basically just sits there. And so that gap is going to get wider over time. And so the people who win in the next few years will be reading the jobs data carefully rather than focusing on the prestige. Now, like I said, your LSAT score is the biggest lever you can move going forward to get into better law schools, to get more scholarship money. If you want my help getting your LSAT score up, I'm happy to help you out on that journey. I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now and later. You can book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in the link in my bio as well.